we're joined today with the intrepid Mark Carey. Before we dive in, I have a couple of thank yous, if that's all right with you,
Yeah.
Mark.
Man.
Perfect. Just running through a quick list here. We've had some recent help on some different items that we're going to be sending in country. I want to thank again my good friend Mark Spear at Rocky Boots. We put together a boot order some time ago for Troy Offenbecker, United States Marine that's volunteering in Ukraine, currently as an instructor. And we were able to send, I believe, 13 pair of boots in. And recently, in talking with Kevin Raisin of the Sunflower Project, he had also put in a request for some boots. I reached out to Mark at Rocky, and he's putting together an order for me. So that's wonderful news. Rocky is not an official sponsor of the channel yet. So Mark, nod and a wink. If that's something we could make happen, that'd be fantastic. Also, my good friend, Harley Whitehead, I call him the Donbass Express. Harley's been a great friend to me through all this, and we talk virtually every day. So keeping that communication open, seeing all the good work that Harley's doing is fantastic. And one of my new Ukrainian friends that I've recently made, Sergei Savchenko of the Savchenko Workshop. Sergei, he's a bladesmith. He makes knives at cost for Ukrainian defenders. And I recently had purchased a couple of blades for some volunteers, Harley being one, Troy Offenbecker being another. So we'll give him a little shout out and a little business promotion. So I'll post a link to his site, and with that we'll get started. So
All right.
I appreciate you taking the time and sitting down with us. You've been a friend of the channel and myself, and I thought I wanted to give you another platform to share what you do. And the first question I'd have to ask is, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a veteran, you're a Marine. The only thing I disagreed with in the video that you sent me, you said former Marine. For everybody that's watching, there are no former Marines. I know that's just for definition purposes, but what went off in your mind when the conflict started that you had to be involved? Talk us through that process.
So you mentioned, when we did this invitation at first, two old Cold War kids getting together discussing, that among other things. So when I was in college, when I was in the Marine Corps, it was in the 80s, and we were training to fight the Soviet Union, and everything that we did was to that end. When I went to college, my first major before I switched was in Soviet and Eastern European studies, Russian history, Russian literature. So I got a lot of experience studying that culture and the foreign policy and all of their behaviors, if you will, and their ideology. And I came to hate it, it's for lack of a better term, right? I mean, people who know me, I have a friend of mine from Norway, and she likes to talk about socialism and everything. But she assures me, she goes, "Don't worry, I'm not a communist." So when the war started, just the way I see geopolitics and the way I've studied history, and I don't know everything. I know I pop off a lot on social media. I try to be as accurate as possible with a lot of the stuff I put out there. But when I saw those tanks rolling, and I knew they were coming, I think we all kind of knew they were coming. You don't put 200,000 troops on another country's border and then don't use them, which I think is a good lesson that we all need to learn for the Western Pacific as well. But I saw those, and I knew it was coming. And when it did come, knowing what I know about Ukrainian history, it's just a continuation of the war that they started in 2014. It pissed me off. And I was kind of one of those Marines that was kind of in between a period of peace. It was after the Vietnam War. It was before the Gulf War. I had a little taste of it in Panama, during the Noriega affair, but nothing to write home about. And I said, okay, the first thing I would like to do, I think, is go fight. And now I am 56 years old. So when the war started, I was 55. That was my first inclination. And I talked to my wife and my kids, and, my kids were like, "Don't do that, Dad. That's stupid." And my wife was like, "Hey, I know she's a military family." I said, "I know who I married. And even if I told you I didn't want you to, you'd probably still go do it again. So do it anyway." So we talked, and I talk about this in these presentations that I do too, as kind of the hook for my discussion when I give these presents around the state. I go to the gym, I wake up a couple days later and I'm feeling sore and I'm not very fast. And, I do hit the range a lot, and I consider myself a pretty decent, marksman, firearms guy. But I was like, am I going to add any value to that effort? Am I going to go make a huge difference? Is one guy with a rifle, not everybody with a rifle, because obviously people with rifles make a difference. I wasn't sure if that was the right path for me when I took everything into consideration as a whole, but I said to myself, I have to do something. I feel called to do something. And there's only been a couple times in my life when I've actually felt what people refer to as a calling. And that was it. That was it for me. And so I called my son, who was 18 at the time, and I said, hey, do you want to go to the Ukrainian-Polish border and help refugees? And he was like, I'm all in. Let's go. So that was what started it. And then we spent 2 weeks there in Medica with, probably that's where most of the volunteers that I have run into over there, we all kind of started there. A lot of people, we know each other, or we know the organizations that we all belong to. And so it was an incredibly positive experience. And we were only there for 2 weeks. And I wasn't back 5 days before I knew I was going to go back. And then at that time, everybody was moving deeper into the country because we were able to do more the closer we were to what was going on. So I can be a little long-winded, just so you know, Michael. No. So feel free to cut me off. Sure. For people who know me, they're like, "Oh my God, is he still talking?"
No, I'm the same way.
Right,
and that's probably why we're with the women that are in our lives. They know what to say. So you've been over several times. I keep hearing, and my goal is to eventually. I think my fiance would probably kill me. She'd definitely end the relationship if I went. Very similar on this end. I got to go. We got to go. We got to go help. We got to do something. And I have more or less got the ultimatum. If you go, I also am going. So, but very similar. What can we do to help? And that kind of led me here. So when you're going over, I keep hearing about the high level of patriotism that exists in Ukraine. Everybody, World War II values. Our friend Kate, she a mutual friend in the Ukraine circle, she defined it as the World War II values that defined an American generation. Do you see that in your experience? And can you kind of give us here in the States or around the world a feel of what that entails, the feeling that you get from the Ukrainian people as you've interacted with them?
Yeah, I do. Now this is the longest time I've been away, which has been 5 months, and things change. Things change in Ukraine every 45 seconds. I see some of the people on the chat here, and a lot of them have been over there, and they'll tell you, you can make a plan on Monday at 8 o'clock and it'll be different and completely different by 9:30 that day. That's the same for the time period that I've been gone. My interactions with the Ukrainian people, with Ukrainian soldiers, doctors, all the people I've met over there has been one of defiance, determination, and patriotism. They'll tell you honestly, and we all know, no society is perfect. And as a former Soviet satellite nation, just like with the Baltics and just like with Poland and all these other countries that left the Soviet Union and left the Warsaw Pact and came to the West, they have a lot of things they have to clean up. And they're not shy about talking about it. I just had a discussion this morning with a guy who's over there right now talking about some of the issues he's working on, trying to deal with getting certain supplies. And there's still issues. That being said, the patriotism is something that I remember from when we were kids and even, when I was in the Marine Corps. And patriotism can be defined a lot of different ways. It has positive connotations. It has negative connotations. But what I see is a country determined. Now, I have not been as close to the front as a lot of my friends, as Harley has, as Eddie has, as Brandon, guys, and Becca, people I know on the internet who are there 24 hours a day. But I know that they will tell you that everybody's tired. Everyone is tired. Everyone is, especially after the winter, having been there in the winter and not been in a fighting hole, it sucks the will to live out of you. And, I think back to my relatives who fought in Europe in World War II. and the Battle of the Bulge and how cold it is in Europe. And the coldest I've been in months, years, was in Zaporizhia on a Saturday night. And I was relatively comfortable. So I will say that, I think just like any country at war, especially in this kind of war, this artillery-based drone, constant attack war, I think people are tired. But I don't see them giving up. And every time the Russians hit, like last night, they hit, an ammo dump outside of a city, and I don't know if you saw the videos of that, but it looked like a nuclear weapon. It just pisses them off more, Just, I feel the same way we did after 9/11. It didn't matter what color you were, what religion you were, where you came from. We were all united until we kind of did ourselves in with some policy decisions. But whatever, that's the way I see it over there. And the soldiers I talk to, and the people that I know, the people that spend time in bomb shelters teaching children, people going about their lives. Yeah, the patriotism is a real thing. Again, a real long-winded answer there. Yes, I see patriotism, but I also see that they realize, there's a lot of things in play, and patriotism alone doesn't win you wars.
Sure. Well, we have actually a very good question that just came in from Dan Menard. This is a great question, and your knowledge of the history of warfare will be very, very fitting for this. You talked about policy. I want to get to this one real quick. His question essentially is, he served in Afghanistan. While we're helping the Ukrainians, is it possible that we're hurting them in the long term? To build on that, the American follow-through, and I know this is something you've seen, and I want to say this like as much of a patriot as I possibly can. Sometimes we enter into these conflicts, we go into these countries, and our guy, President Reagan, was famous for saying at the end of driving the Russians out of Afghanistan, a couple $1 million to rebuild schools and hospitals, and he asked if that conflict was still going on in jest. Obviously, there's going to be a need for a Marshall Plan when this is over. There's going to be a need for watchdog organizations to go in to monitor the funds. And what do you see, having been there, in the rebuilding of the country? And then I definitely want to dive into your volunteerism. What do you see is needed, is necessary, as far as the German Marshall Group, so on, these different service organizations, these watchdogs, to watch the money? I mean, we're talking billions of dollars. What do you have a breakdown on what may be required, or what you would like to see happen?
I mean, I don't personally have a breakdown, and I've heard all kinds of numbers thrown around. I've heard, billions. I mean, let's take a look at Afghanistan and Iraq real quick. If I'm not mistaken, and somebody correct me on this, the bill for those two wars is over $1 trillion, right? Right when we were supposed to be getting a so-called peace dividend from the end of the Cold War. Dan raises a good point. He says down there, we chopped their legs out from underneath them, and I can't read the rest of it. But so here's the thing. I firmly believe that we're doing the right thing, and I firmly believe that NATO is doing the right thing. I am one of these people. You can call me a neocon. You can call me an internationalist, a globalist, whatever you want, whatever pejorative term you want to stick on me. I believe that it is the responsibility of developed democracies like the United States that we don't just hoard our democracy for ourselves. And Reagan was a champion of that. He realized that we need to be an example to the rest of the world. Same with Western Europe. We need to be example, and we need to be trusted by these countries that, like Ukraine, like South Korea, like some of these other places, when they put their faith in us, we need to be trusted that we're going to follow through. And I think what Dan is talking about, and I agree with him, you can say whatever you want about how we got into Iraq and Afghanistan. The way we got out of Afghanistan, unacceptable when you're talking about how to run a foreign policy. It was ridiculous. We cannot make the same mistake. Colin Powell once said, once you break it, you buy it. That's what he was talking about with the Iraq war. Once you broke it, you buy it. Thus far, we're not the ones breaking anything in Ukraine. I love my country, but I also know that we have a really bad tendency to try to go in, and mission creep takes over, and we start saying, okay, we're going to do this. Well, now that presents another set of challenges. Well, we need to do this. We saw the same thing in Somalia. We haven't broken it, but we've invested we've invested $100 billion, depending on which way you look at actually what's been allocated versus what's been spent on the military and humanitarian effort. And so has Europe. I see a lot of people on the internet, Europe hasn't done a damn thing. You need to check your numbers, because Europe has done a phenomenal amount. When you look at the percentage of GDP of a place like Latvia or Estonia, they're giving them more than we are. But it isn't a who's doing what. I think I also hear, we can't be the policeman of the world. I agree with that. But I also go back to my original statement that I firmly believe that as a democracy and as a free nation, we need to help countries, especially countries of the former Soviet Union, because we fought a Cold War, and Putin has basically said, after he's gone through all the other excuses about why he invaded, I want Ukraine back because it was the first country to leave the Soviet Union, and the breakup of the Soviet Union is the worst thing that happened in the 20th century. So again, a long answer, we need to be real careful and real specific about where this money goes. Now, I know that we've set up a logistics and command center run by a U.S. general, I believe, that's overseeing all the distribution for weapons. I think that's a positive thing. And that needs to continue. As far as rebuilding, honestly, Michael, I can't think about rebuilding other than the kind of small stuff that I take part in about, putting windows in a building or demoing something, because I don't know, but it's going to be a lot. And we cannot afford to go in and assist them with all of this money and then turn around and say, okay, well, we're not going to help you anymore, because then what you're going to have is you're just going to have a destroyed country with a crappy economy, and the oligarchs are going to come in there and they're going to take over again, maybe, and they're going to, the corruption won't end, and the integration into the European Union and NATO won't be able to come about. So while we haven't broken it, we have invested in it. So to a certain extent, we own it, along with NATO and along with the EU. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's a good point. That's a good point, Dan. And I wasn't in Iraq or Afghanistan, but I know right where you're coming from, and it's depressing. And I think it's also a viable reason why Americans are very wary about getting involved in any more conflicts. I don't think you can blame people for feeling that way.
And as far as being a neocon or anything goes, I'll refer to us both as transatlantics. That's my brother likes to refer to me as a transatlantic. I think that's got a little more positive connotation to it.
Okay, I'll take it.
So as far as preparation, I know you were working on the Polish side of the Ukrainian border, and Poland has done, they should build statues to the Prime Minister and President Duda over there when this is over with. Their contribution to this conflict has been absolutely astronomical. The amount of refugees they've taken in, the military equipment they've sent in, the humanitarian aid has been off the charts. But you were working on the Polish side, and I know from watching one of your talks, you had contacted your son about going into the country, and he was already in Ukraine, which I thought was fantastic. So what kind of preparation did it take when you left Poland and went into country? What kind of equipment, what kind of humanitarian supplies, food, so on, did you take with you? And when you got there, did you have the right things? Did you have to adjust? What was the process?
That's a good question. And so when we first went, and I know a lot of volunteers will tell you the same thing, we contacted every organization under the sun, said, hey, we want to go help, what can we do? We never got a phone call or an email. There was only one organization, which I won't name, that got back to me, and only because I am friends with the CEO of the organization. And she got back to me, and then she sent me an application, and I filled it out, and I didn't hear anything. So after a couple of weeks of that, which kind of held us back, we would have been there faster if it hadn't been, for getting blown off. So we just decided we're just going to go ourselves. And I had the luxury of having a friend of mine who was an active duty Border Patrol agent who had been assigned to the consulate. And he was working in Rzeszów, and he was kind of funneling me information about where the best place to go was. And that was Medica. And I didn't know that at the time, but he sent me all the stats, and you could see that the overwhelming majority of people were coming through there. So we just went on our own. We rented a car. We drove from Warsaw. We had no idea where we were going to stay. We stopped at a supermarket, in Zazov, and we just filled up the car with food, with you name it, diapers, hygiene products, water. We had no idea what to expect. So we went to Medica, we parked, we got out, we started walking around, we started talking to different organizations, and we ended up working for World Central Kitchen. And I always tell people that people that don't know who World Central Kitchen is, that is a phenomenal organization started by Jose Andres. And we had 2 tents, we had to fill out an application, and we were accepted. And then we started working in the tent that was actually closest to the border line in the port of entry area there. As far as what we brought with us, medical supplies. I always bring medical supplies. My back room is collecting all of that: tourniquets, needle decompression, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, the usual. And I always wonder, because I see on Instagram and on social media all of these massive shipments that are coming, and I asked people that I know on the front, I'm like, is it still good for me to bring this stuff? Because I know there's a couple new tourniquet companies that have popped up, but we didn't know at the time what we needed, so we brought everything that we could. And we found an organization called Paracrew, based out of Norway, and they had a little camp up the hill from where we were. And I said, hey, who do I give all this medical gear to? Oh, go talk to Paracrew. So we went up there and we talked to the guys, and we turned it over to them, and they were going in and out every day. So they brought it into where it was needed. And every trip that I take, I bring as much medical stuff as I can, because I've been told by everybody, yeah, we still need it. Because one of the things, too, that people need to understand is that the logistics of getting things into the country in bulk and then getting to the front line, what they call the last mile, getting them where they're needed, that's a tedious, long process. So that's why individual volunteers, like Eddie, for example, and Harley. I mean, Harley's putting I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of miles on his vehicle, right? Doing that. So we started working for World Central Kitchen. And did we have what we needed? Yeah, we did. Because we were in a controlled environment. We didn't know how close the war was going to come to where we were at the time. A couple of weeks after the invasion, 3 weeks, nobody knew. Lviv was getting hit. That was the closest Ukrainian city. But when we got there, people would cross over to Cheny on the other side, and it was, your heart rate went up, and even though we were hundreds of kilometers from the fighting, nobody really knew what was going to happen. So we had everything that we needed, and what we didn't have, we bought in Poland. Like, for example, these suitcases. The refugees would come across. You saw that in the video that I sent. The refugees that come across, they had nothing. Everything was in a paper bag or a gym bag. So there was a guy in our tent who had started this thing where he hooked up with this Polish guy, and they were providing suitcases. And so we took that over from him, bought the suitcases at cost from this guy named Goest, who we call the suitcase baron of Eastern Europe, because he was going as far as Slovakia to get suitcases. It was amazing. And we would give them to the refugees as they came across, and they would break down in tears, and they were just amazed that, and they would be like, oh, we don't have any money, we can't pay you. And we're just like, no, it's free, take it. And then we got into blankets, and there was a store, and I can't remember the name of it, in Przemysl. We would go every other day and buy all the fleece blankets that they owned. They were like $5 a pop. We would buy hundreds of them and pass them out, because it was winter, and it's incredibly cold. So I think I answered your question.
No, absolutely. As far as that last mile, when I last spoke with Harley, he brought a new vehicle in, a four-wheel drive that was donated, and Rasputitsa, the general winter, the Russian-Ukrainian winter and mud season, they act as the Russians' second army, essentially. How much of that did you have to deal with? We see the videos of just the fields of mud, the 2, 3, 4 foot deep mud. While you were there, can you give us your take on just what that does as far as being a volunteer and delivering supplies?
Right. The last time I was there was middle of November to the end of December. And my teammate, Jaime Dunn from the UK, has a van that she brings from the UK whenever we work together. And then we also partner up with some other people, and we'll jump into their vans. We didn't experience the mud as much as guys like Harley and Eddie and those guys do, because they were much closer to the front. The areas that we were going, mainly like Kherson, that area, we could get in there with, you know, on paved roads. It's a big city. We used Google Maps one time, and I think it took us 4 hours to go 100 miles because this road was just destroyed. So I learned, but then we just kind of winged it the next time. And I said, hey, I told Jaime, I said, hey, we're going to take this other road. I have no idea where it goes or if it's even open because Google said it's closed. But what did get to us was the ice and snow. And I've never driven in conditions like that. And we left Kharkiv to go to Dnipro, to go to Zaporizhia, in an area close to the front down there. And when we left Kharkiv at about 5 o'clock in the morning, we couldn't see 20 feet in front of us. That was something I hadn't experienced except for the Central Valley in California near where I grew up. That was a pretty common occurrence, but that's been decades. And on top of that, not only it was foggy, it was snowing, and then it started hailing, and then there was ice. We had to stop every 70 or 80 miles to scrape the windshield and the headlights and get the wipers unstuck. But the mud is, I've only experienced that in the summer, the previous summer, like last August, I think, we were driving to this little village called Sharifka with a bunch of stuff that we brought for a convalescent home. I was driving and we pulled up and I saw this big mud puddle and everybody else in the vehicle was like, don't do it, man. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm a border patrol agent. I can get through this thing. This is nothing. You know, we used to do this all the time down on the border. Yeah, we used to do it on the border in a Ford Bronco with lockers and, you know, winches if we needed to get out. And Jaime's like, you know, oh, please don't drive the van in the hole, or something to that effect. I don't know if she's watching, but that's pretty pathetic British accent. But so I said, no, I'm going to turn around and do that. You know, I've spent plenty of time digging myself out, and but we did stop to try to help a truck driver who was trying to pull out, and you get out of the van and you're just covered in mud. You know, so the guys who were actually doing that last mile on dirt roads to, you know, places like Bakhmut and those cities along the line, Marinka and all that, that's insane. And it has stopped the advances on both sides, you know, that you can't run armor and vehicles and stuff in that. So we're all waiting for that to dry up.
Sure. As far as, I had a wonderful question. It's just escaped me.
Right. Because my incessant talking probably pulled it out.
I'm even making notes over here.
Okay.
As far as meeting, I remembered it. As far as meeting the refugees as they're fleeing this conflict, you're meeting women and children. The men had to stay behind. Fighting age men are staying behind in country. So you're meeting women and children, and the one thing that kept going through my mind as we're watching these women and children fleeing this country, and as you said, they're showing up with nothing. I like to give people here at home or anywhere that they may be watching this a point of contact. We've got it pretty good. I mean, we've got it really good. Right before we did this, I've been out working on landscaping all day. I mean, I'm sure that these people would love to be doing the same thing, and instead they're crossing into a foreign country with nothing.
Right.
So could you kind of detail what they were coming across with? I mean, you said nothing in some cases. And can you put that in perspective for us here in the West, having been on the ground and seen that level of hopelessness and just really suffering as they're leaving, not knowing when they're going to see their spouse again, their dad again?
Yeah.
Can you put that into context for us?
I mean, I saw everything from people with literally nothing but the clothes on their back to people, you know, families with large kind of sea bag stuff that was what they could carry when they got out. And at that time, a lot of them were coming from Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, and those areas, and Kharkiv, because that was where the fighting was really hitting hard. And I just remember, you know, a lot of tears, a lot of looks of relief. That atmosphere on the walkway coming from the border to the bus area where you just pass through 20 or 50 different organizations all looking to hand you things that help you. I mean, we were serving food, and I mean, I saw everything. I saw people with frostbite, because when the Polish side, everybody who's been through Polish and Ukrainian customs will know what I'm talking about. It takes forever. In the U.S., when you cross the border in the United States, the the immigration inspectors at the port have a certain amount of time mandated that they're only allowed to spend X amount of minutes inspecting you, and then they have to let you through. Well, we had lines that there were lines a half a mile long, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was snowing or it was hailing. So you had a lot of, you had some hypothermia. The Israelis had a tent right as soon as you crossed in, a medical tent where they were doing everything from, crying children to people with, people were coming with injuries. I don't know, they either got them on the way, they got them when they were trying to escape. Old women, babushkas, they're in their 90s, they've seen everything, and here we go again. It was really sometimes very painful to see. The thing that kind of kept us all in check was we had each other as volunteers, and the volunteer community was really, really tight. We had a bunch of Bolivians next to us. We had the Israelis on the other side. And just the idea that we're doing what we can to help them. But I remember one kid, he had cerebral palsy, and they were bringing him across in a wheelchair, and he'd been sitting in that line on the Ukrainian side for hours. And the Israeli doctors ran right out, and they said, this kid's got hypothermia. He's turning blue, so they took him into the warming tent as quickly as they could. And they had a separate tent for women and children. The Israelis did. They set it up so that, and then my friend Jaime that I mentioned before, she had a tent with another girl named Christy, and they were giving away, hygiene supplies for women and kids. But yeah, like I said, I saw a woman with everything that she carried in a grocery bag. That was it, grocery bag. So, and then when they would come in, they would go to this Tesco, which is like a Costco or a Sam's Club, and it was all cleared out for the refugees. And then there was assistance, there was legal assistance, there was transport assistance. Hey, if you got a way to get in further into Europe, if you have any help, we'll find you a place to go. But when I was working as a Border Patrol agent, obviously these people would come across with nothing but a plastic bag or a backpack also. It's a little bit different situation. Well, it's a lot different situation, refugees from, illegal entries. But I remember also, I met a woman, and I can't remember her name, Caroline, I believe, and she was going back, and she had been from Irpin, and she was a teacher at Irpin. She left when the war first started and went to Berlin and was trying to do online school with the people in the Kiev region that she taught. And then after the Bucha massacre, she basically told me that there was no reason for her to be in Berlin doing school online because all of her students were either dead or they had to evacuate. And then Irpin was liberated while we were there, and so she was heading back. And I just remember her crying and hugging all of us. I was with 4 or 5 guys and women from Israel, and she was just like, thank you for helping us, And I don't care how cynical somebody is, you hear that and you see it, and then she gives us a big hug and she's crying and she goes back, hops on the bus and goes back to Kyiv. It was pretty amazing.
Heartrending. That's absolutely incredible. As far as you've been around the military that's there and coming from a military background, you and I have discussed the shaping operations that are taking place. I wouldn't say, but maybe that'd be the right. I'm a civilian. Hitting these high value targets, radar, anti-air, so on and so forth. That's taking place now. Fuel depots, ammo depots. We're seeing that happen, and I don't know if this is something that they would want to get out, but I'm also getting reports from people that are on the ground of units that are still severely lacking in equipment. These 9 offensive brigades that they've put together, they're still seeing shortages in VG, ammunition, footwear, basic footwear, medical supplies.
Mm-hmm.
What we've talked about the slow rolling of equipment, and I know you have strong thoughts on that. And for us here at home that are balking at the dollar signs, and a lot of that is estimated equipment value. Could you expand on that a little bit and just give us your thoughts? I think it's important that people hear that from a veteran's perspective. There are several organizations. Brandon, Harley, Jake Knotts just joined. I know that you're friends with him, and he's doing a lot of work on that. Could you detail the equipment, the speed in which it moves? I think it was Secretary Austin that said we need to move at the speed of war, and we haven't always done that. Probably is a fair way to say it, probably a gentle way to say it. But could you talk about equipment that you saw that the guys in the territorial defense, the Ukrainian army, the Legion, that they need? And if you were talking to an American politician, British politician, any of these countries that are helping, what do they need? And what would you have to say to them? I think that's a great way to put it.
Well, I appreciate the question. I mean, that again, I'm not a high-level logistician, so I'm just going to give you what I know, and there's a lot of things I don't know. I guess, as Donald Rumsfeld says, there's a lot of things I don't know that I don't know. But
known unknowns.
No, not right. Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions that I try to address is this idea that, oh, well, we're giving them all of this. Why are people on Instagram still asking for money for NVGs, for drones, for boots? Why are we still doing that? And I think the U.S. and NATO are providing, and I could be wrong, but this is just what I'm seeing. The big ticket items that are coming over there, the HIMARS, the HARM missiles, the repair kits, the armor, all of that are big ticket items that every military needs in order to carry out offensive operations, period. The things that don't get talked about and are definitely not being provided, or if they are, I haven't seen it to the level that they should be, are stuff for the average infantryman, the guy who's going to go in there with that equipment and have to do the job. Because you can have all the cool artillery that you want, but you got to have people to take territory. It's just like in the Border Patrol, we said, oh, all these politicians are like, you need more drones, you need more of this, you need more of that. Well, that's fine, but if we can't go arrest the people that the drone sees, it doesn't help. So I just talked to a guy this morning who said that, he's working with a National Guard unit and they're conscripts, and they are lacking in a lot of those basics, even basic uniforms. When I remember the first time I was there, or the first time I was further into the country, the soldiers were wearing tennis shoes because that's all they had was tennis shoes. Now, it was the summertime, but I'm thinking, damn, when wintertime comes, that's going to be a big deal. So I don't really know what the NATO countries in the U.S. are doing to address that issue, but I do know that one of the big problems with Ukraine is when they conscript these people, there's the conscripts and the volunteers, and then there's the equipment. And a lot of people ask, well, how come they don't have a draft? How come everybody's not fighting? And that's a reasonable question. And one of the answers that I get from asking that question myself is that we don't have enough stuff. So we can draft all the military-age males. There's two parts to that. A, we don't have enough stuff. And the other part is we still need people here to run this economy. And have, my grandfather was military-age male during World War II, but he was considered in a defense-critical industry where he was making parts for battleships. So they still need that. But as far as what the guys are getting, that's why people like me, and I just shipped a bunch of stuff to somebody who is going to be able to help me get that in, with all the proper paperwork, some things for weapons, and I've brought some things in myself. That's piecemeal. There's hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and we're trying to get there. But that's why if you see me, I'll post things from people, be like, hey, this person in this unit needs a pair of NVGs. And then I get the inevitable DM, well, I thought we were giving them all this shit. Yes, we are. And also the logistics chain is slow. If anybody's ever been in the military, it's not like Jack Bauer can't just pick up a phone and say, I need an airstrike over here and give me an F-16. And there's bureaucracy, and there's a lot of bureaucracy in Ukraine. Anybody that's watching this, all the volunteers in Ukraine talk about all the stamps. Like, you have to have a stamp for everything. A friend of mine posted a thing on the internet that said, hey, look, I'm a stamp collector. That's my job. Because in order to get anything done, you have to go through these multi-layers of bureaucracy, and they've streamlined it as much as they can, but they're also dealing with a lot of Soviet-era mentality that will go way. And if you talk to the young people, everybody's like, oh my God, it's sort of like, the okay boomer thing. You know, there's people, we're not boomers. I have to keep reminding people that. But there's people that'll say, you know, as soon as all you boomers get out of here, you know, we can fix this country. And in Ukraine, there's a lot of that kind of mentality. As soon as we get all these Soviet, you know, people out of here, we'll be able to move forward. So I know that those kind of items for individual soldiers or small units are still being, the majority of those things are being done through donations, through corporate donations. You know, guys like Jake are bringing in just a ton of stuff. And I really want to pick his brains about how he's done that. Now, he's a businessman. He's a logistics, that's his job. So, of course, he's going to have, you know, a better idea of how that works than me. But, yeah, I think, you know, and then to also touch on your point about the slow roll of equipment, geopolitically, for a lot of reasons, we are slow rolling equipment. And my concern, and this kind of goes back to what Dan was talking about, is that we're giving the Ukrainians right now just enough not to lose. But are we really giving them enough to win? And is that our strategy? I honestly can't answer that. I think that a lot of people in the U.S., you know, government, in the Biden administration, you know, Austin and Blinken and all those guys say, we're with you till the end. Well, nobody's defined what the end is. And all we have to do is have a change of administrations, and that definition is going to get even more fuzzy. So if these offensive operations that everybody's been asking, everybody's been hoping for, waiting for, we're all sitting here on the edge of our seat waiting for that to kick off. Do they have enough? I don't know. I know that their model of warfare, they're going to have to counter the Russians' just massive meat waves of human beings like at Stalingrad with precision weapons and maneuver warfare. You know, the Soviet doctrine is not maneuver warfare. It's take this trench, sit here, and shoot that way until somebody comes and tells you to keep moving. And we're just going to sit here and absorb 20,000 rounds of artillery. Well, both sides are running low. Just because that kind of warfare hasn't been fought since 1918. And it's amazing to see that. So hopefully, and I believe this has happened to a certain extent, the Ukrainians have been schooled. I know their general, whose name I can't pronounce, or I could pronounce, but I'm not going to try to embarrass myself. He's a Western trained military officer, and he knows maneuver warfare, and that's what's going to win the war. So they have to be more precise, they have to be more technical, and they have to move. They can't just sit in one spot. So we need to provide the equipment in order to be able to do that. And people are like, well, you know, we need to give them F-16s. Well, one thing I learned, you know, being in the military and being in the Border Patrol is you really shouldn't ask for a specific platform. You should ask for a capability. So F-16s are sexy, right? Is that the best platform for Ukraine? Probably not, because they require absolutely pristine runways in order to operate. That big giant air thing in the front just sucks all of the FOD off of the runway, and it'll destroy the plane. It's not super durable for that kind of environment. The MiG-29 and the SUs are much more. And my understanding is the Gripens from Sweden or up in the Nordics, I don't know, I think it's Sweden that makes those, or maybe the Mirage are much better. So the F-16 is cool. You know, I thought at first, you know, the A-10 was made to destroy Soviet armor. It's a flying tank. Well, you can't fly that thing around at those low speeds if you don't have complete control of the air, and you can't achieve that without fighters. So the A-10, while we think, yeah, you know, everybody expected the Russians to cross the Fulda Gap into Western Europe, and that was going to be the start of World War III, and that aircraft was designed to just fly in the Fulda Gap and destroy armor, but it's a little bit different when you don't have control of the skies. So as much as I would love to see some birds going on over there, that's not the platform. So
as you said that, I reached over and I keep my Time magazine of General's illusioning here next to my desk.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I actually, as you were talking about platforms, I wrote down the JAS Gripen, and as you said that about the A-10s, I wrote airspeed, as they have the modern combat airspeed of a World War II fighter plane.
Right.
So, and that was the next thing that I was going to bring up was combined arms. The United States military fights through combined arms: artillery, infantry, air power, and sea power. And that is a critical component that, and hearing you say asking for capability, that is exactly what retired General Ben Hodges says all the time. We don't need to talk about platform, we need to talk about capability.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the big thing that I continue to read and continue to hear about the MiG-29 is limited radar capability, whereas the newer the newer Russian planes, have greater radar capability.
Right.
And the same thing, the issues with the landing gear of the F-16 and the Gripen seems to have a stronger nose landing gear, however that works.
More durable for more primitive airstrips, I guess, is kind of the way to say it.
And so, a definitely much less expensive platform also.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you can't just train somebody overnight to fly an F-16 or any fighter. My understanding is, I live in Arizona, down at Davis Monthan Air Force Base a few months ago, and they're saying it was a few months ago. I don't know how long ago it was, but they started bringing in Ukrainian pilots to evaluate their capability to fly our aircraft. And just like Ukrainians do with everything, because they are and I want to go into that too when I get a chance, but the assessment of the U.S. military was basically that they're more than capable of learning how to fly our aircraft. But what I wanted to say on that was one of the things that I did not realize about Ukraine, even though I've studied the Soviet Union, you can't go 5 feet in Ukraine without running into somebody who's not a tech specialist, an IT specialist, an engineer. That is a brainy country. Yes, it's agricultural, but if you get into the cities and the younger people, it's amazing the amount of ingenuity and the amount of they are capable of. They're in a lot of ways, and with their education system too, and I have another story about that for later, but they are intelligent people. And I think it's not some, forgive the term, because I guess it's not politically correct. It's not some third world, F-hole that's being invaded and needs to, can't handle the technology. It is an extremely talented and educated country that and I think it's amusing when a lot of American military people are like, oh, it's going to take them forever to learn how to use the HIMARS. Yeah, okay. They fixed that real quick, and as we've seen, they're more than capable of handling. I think sometimes we get a little Amerocentric in our ideas about what people can handle. It's not Afghanistan. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that.
Absolutely. And before we dive too far off subject, is there anything?
That's what I do, Michael. I go off subject.
No, I get it. I'm an Irishman myself, so we do the same thing.
Right. Right. We like to talk, right?
Is there anything about your time in country volunteering that we should know about that you and I haven't covered? The picture of the tank head that was the tank turret that was popped off, and I'm going to actually, with your permission, use that as the thumbnail for our YouTube
absolutely
video. That's just a beautiful thing. Yeah, I thought that was special. But is there anything that we should know that we haven't talked about before we go on too far?
I think, people who follow me on Instagram know how I feel about information operations, which is essential for warfare, but it's also essential for basically making sure everybody gets the right information. And I don't know if this is really what you are talking about, but there are so many misconceptions and so much misinformation and so much just bullshit, for the lack of a better term, surrounding what's going on in this war, that I think what people really need to do is stop mindlessly reposting things on off the internet, and mindlessly just hitting, send on stuff that's just not verified. I had a post the other day because look, I'm retired. Okay. I have a 3-hour-a-day job, 3 days a week at a 4-wheel drive place here in town. And I volunteer with the sheriff's office, search and rescue, probably not as much as I need to be. And I'm involved with our veterans group, but otherwise I'm a nerd and I sit around and I read news and I read and I read books and I study. And I think we've become, in our society, it's just two things happen. You know, there's these conspiracy theories, and then there's also just blatant people reading things and thinking that they're reading something that they're not reading, and they don't cross-check it. They just pass it on as information. And that has gone a long way, in my opinion, to the divide that we're experiencing over what's happening and what needs to happen and what we're doing. And I would just ask or say that I think that is not helpful, and it's detrimental, and it's actually, I have a lot of other words for it, but I won't use those. I think if you have a question about Ukraine, ask somebody who's been there. Ask somebody who's, go on the internet and find a guy. There's 50 million Ukrainian soldiers that'll answer your questions. And they're the ones who are going to be able to tell you what's really going on. Brandon Mitchell is the wealth of information about everything that you want to know about Ukraine. And he's honest, sometimes a little too honest, but he knows what he's talking about. He's been there from the beginning. He's been in Donbass since the beginning. He knows what's going on the ground. He's got an extensive YouTube collection, every topic that you would want to know, and he's raw and honest, and that's where people need to be getting their information from, not from some fired guy on some news media channel who's popping off and he's never even been in the country. So I would say that's one of the things that people need to know, that a lot of what they're hearing. I was raised, believe, I guess it was half of what you see, a third of what you hear, and a quarter of what you read, or something like that. And that goes for everything. Just do your due diligence before you form an opinion, and then, God forbid, you pass that opinion on to somebody else when you really don't know what you're talking about.
Well, and from a historical perspective, just to piggyback on that, our involvement in World War II was probably one of the finest chapters in American history. The fact that we stepped up and helped in the way that we did, and we did that by sending an American envoy. President Roosevelt sent Harry Hopkins to meet with Churchill and evaluate the country and evaluate Churchill himself. And I'll post the quote, but he quoted from what he said was the Book of Books, "Whither thou goest, I will go." And as you said, it's important that we engage with people that are there, that are doing this on the front lines, doing this every day, as opposed to to be generous, a fired talking head who has probably ulterior motives. I'll put it that way, to be generous. So as you said, there's a wealth of people out there. Yourself, Harley, Brandon. There's so many volunteers that I've today. My gosh, I'm glad that we posted that we were doing this together, because friend request after follow request, and messages left and right, where I'm going to be able to contact and meet more people that are on the ground doing it. So you mentioned something earlier, until the end. What does, obviously we know what it looks like in your mind, but Blinken and Biden and these Sunak and so on, they all say the same thing. We're with you till the end. What does in the end look like to Mark Perry?
Right. To me, I'm going to be real careful how I answer this, because I know that there's people that maybe not want to hear it, but ideally, obviously, from the Ukrainian perspective, the end means everything back, including Crimea. That's what I want to see. I want to see everything back, including Crimea. I've had numerous friends of mine there say, the next time that I see you, we're going to be drinking beer on the beach in Crimea. And I want that to be true more than anything. Realistically, politically, militarily, those questions are going to be answered in the next couple of months based on how this counteroffensive goes. And that will tell the tale. Just got a software update.
Oh.
That's going to tell the tale. So I am going to hold off on predictions, because I'm just a retired dude from Arizona that knows a lot about the military and goes over there and tries to help. But I want that to be the case. And in order for that to happen, a lot of things need to fall into place perfectly. Is that going to happen? I don't know. Are we going to be able to? I mean, Putin's strategy is, he's going to wait us out. He doesn't have to worry about his reelection because he gets reelected every 4 years forever. He doesn't have that kind of thing to worry about. Western democracies do, and it could all change. And that's why what I say about the counterattack, it needs to be what we all hope it is in order for those questions to be answered. And I think if it is, and I do think it will be, I just think the Ukrainians, when you look at the counterattack in the Kyiv region at the beginning, you look at the counterattack in September that just, it was like, oh my God, keep going. Like it was amazing to watch the speed at which they were just decimating the Russians and that they were just quitting and leaving everything on the battlefield. And if they can replicate that, no question in my mind that we'll be drinking beer in Crimea. And that's what I hope. And but a lot of that, it's not for me to predict because a lot of things that I don't even know about have to fall into place to do that.
Sure. Nope, I understand, and that I can respect that degree of realism. Well, Mark, I'll tell you what. Is there anything you want to put out? Any thank yous? Any shout outs? Any other stories? Anything we may have missed along the way?
No, and I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to having a beer with you. Maybe in Crimea at some point. But the one thing that I want to say is, I know you've done a lot with the volunteer community, and I think it's great. Information is key with everything. There are volunteers over there that I have met. I do what I can, and I do what I'm able to do based on a lot of support from a lot of people, mostly family, former coworkers in the Border Patrol, former Marines, business associates when I had my own company. They all have pitched in, and it's hard for me to describe. If you haven't been there and you haven't seen the level of destruction and the wanton disregard for humanity that the Russians have, it's hard to describe how that impacts all of us while we're there. And the people who are on the internet asking for, hey, I need to buy a drone, or hey, we need tourniquets, or this and that. I'm not that guy for a variety of reasons, but those people need our support, and there are people doing far more, exponentially more over there than I have done or I'm going to do. And that's just the reality of it. And so when I see, I know there's war fatigue, right? And I know there's donation fatigue. And I know I talk to my friends up in Norway and Denmark, and they're like, I get it. We have lives. Things change. We move on. We've got inflation. We have employment issues. We've got this and that. But I firmly believe that if a dictatorship is unchecked and allowed to do what the Russians are trying to do, all that does is breed more. And you're going to see it. If the Chinese are watching this, and the Taiwanese are watching this, and the North Koreans are watching it, and the Iranians are watching it, and there's a part of me that's pretty confident that a lot of the decision making that went into this invasion to begin with was because Putin looked at the way we left Afghanistan, and he's like, these guys aren't going to do a damn thing. I'm going to do whatever I want, right? And we've given him those signals in the past, when they took over Crimea, when they went into the Donbass, when they shot down the airliner, when he went into Georgia, when he's gassing people, maybe, I don't know, that gassing thing in Syria. I've heard different things, but basically massacring Syrians, Chechnya, so it's a pattern, and then they always go back and try to use this whole thing about Nazis. He did that. That's from Finland in the Winter War in 1939 and 40. Everything's about Nazis. So what I'm saying is when these guys are on there asking, hey, I need $10 for a tank of gas. These people are busting their ass much more than me, think about it. Just get on there and throw them $10. It's not going to kill you. I spent $10 at Starbucks this morning, and I didn't even get the order right. Right. So, and there's 100 different organizations, but do your due diligence with these organizations too. Make sure you know what you're sending money to. But to these guys working their asses off, Harley, Eddie, Brandon, Becca, I mean, I could go on and on and on. Hundreds of people that and they're risking their lives. Those people are the finest people you're ever going to meet in your life. And I have met the finest people that I've ever met in my life in Ukraine. I'm not going to lie, I've met the worst people in my life in Ukraine. However, thus far, none of them have been Ukrainians. And that's a story for another time. So just pay attention to what's going on and understand that this war is just as violent and brutal as it was on February 24th.
I do have one last question, and then we'll wrap. I asked Kevin Raisin of the Sunflower Project, and this is kind of altruistic, and it might be kind of out there. Now that we've seen more return to Europe, and we have all these different groups working in maybe different directions, but all going towards the same end goal, is there room when Ukraine does win, when this is put to bed, Putin's pushed out, pushed back into Russia, is there room for some sort of guidebook, I guess would be the right way to say this, for volunteers? How do we go about that so that when this happens again, it's not 1,000 different organizations hitting the ground all at once, everybody running around, there's no central focus? I think that's coming, but is there a way to channel all these volunteer efforts? So as you said, you've got to vet these groups. You don't know who you've got to vet the tourniquet company because they may be Chinese knockoffs. Is there a way when this is over with, through a Sunflower Project, through some of these other reputable organizations, that all of these volunteers who are doing great and noble work can come together? This is what we're going to, similar to the pandemic playbook, which that's a whole different thing, but where we can draw that out, take that out of that dusty old file bin and say, this is what we're going to do. Everybody meet here at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, and we're going to go nuts. Is there room for that?
I want to say yes, Michael. I think there's room for that if you break it down geographically, by mission. This group of people is going to focus on supporting the military. This group of people is going to bring aid bags to here. This group of people is going to work on procuring equipment. There's a guy named Asher Robinson who runs one of our WhatsApp channels where there's several hundred volunteers, and he tries to do, basically it's a network that we all kind of tap into to try to figure out who needs what and where. And man, I love it. Asher, that dude is the hardest working guy in the world. We need 30 of him. But I also understand bureaucracy. I understand how governments work and don't work. And so the short answer is, nationally, as an entire country, no, that's not going to happen. Yeah, there's too many egos, there's too many different agendas, there's too many different budgets, there's too many people that think this is the priority when this is. But regionally and within different groups, I know in Kharkiv Oblast, there's a relief coordination center that tries to figure out those needs. And I've actually talked to them. I have a friend that works there, and they'll put out to the volunteer community. And the volunteer community in Kharkiv is unique because there's a lot of people who have kind of taken a leadership role, and people look to them for guidance, and they're tied in with organizations like the Relief Coordination Center. But if you want to get a volunteer effort in the country over all of Ukraine, I just don't see it happening. One example is the Red Cross came into Medica and basically tried to say, look, we're the #1 relief organization in the world, and we need all of you people to get together, and we're going to do it this way. And everybody that was there who had been there on day one, and the Red Cross rolls in there like a month later and wants to take over, everybody's like, bye, not happening, right? Sure. And so they kind of slinked off and did whatever the Red Cross does, which very few of us can figure out what that is. But so, regionally, I think as different organizations, like guys like Asher who are putting these groups together, there's coordination. But that's not going to be more than 30 or 40 people at a pop. And even then, that's probably too big to get a consistent focus. But in the rebuilding, I think, maybe that's a little bit better, because in a war, what do they say? You're trying to drink out of a fire hose. When it's settled, there are organizations already working, to try to coordinate different geographical attempts to do that. And usually they come in after the liberation of the certain areas. Like when I was there at first, it was Chernihiv. everybody was going to Chernihiv. So yeah, that's there you go. I go again, going down 40 rabbit holes.
Sure.
But there you go. That's my answer. Yes and no.
Well, and Jaime Rutherford came in and said that in a war situation, flexibility and lack of red tape is what works best. And that's
Right.
that's a purely civilian question, having not been there. So that's something that's always kind of piqued my interest. I've always wondered about that. But Mark, this has been great. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I loved it.
A lot of fun. Thank you. Yeah. We'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thanks everybody for putting up with me.
No, it's our pleasure. And we'll do this again soon, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Yeah, man. I'll be there. I'll be on the ground June 2nd.
June 2nd. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, we will stay in touch, and we'll keep everybody updated, and we'll keep doing it.
Sounds good, man. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Bye.
Take care.